They thought he'd be easy to silence, a young captain from a landlocked nation, barely armed, surrounded by giants, but when the Nigerian generals sent their warning, private, coded, ruthless, they forgot one thing: Ibrahim Traoré was not raised to bow. Days later, at a summit no camera expected to matter, he stood up, not just to speak, but to unmask. What he said was not politics, it was fire. And what happened next? Not even Abuja could contain. But before it all unraveled, there was one question burning through the heart of Africa: what do you do when your brother becomes your betrayer? Get ready for a stunning revelation on Courageous Voices. The room was windowless, buried beneath the main complex of Nigeria's defense headquarters in Abuja. A single flag stood behind the mahogany table, green, white, green, its fold still yet heavy. Around the table sat 5 men, all generals, all gray with age, but sharpened by years of coups, counter-coups, and quiet wars. No history book recorded. On paper, the meeting was a security consultation. In reality, it was panic management. Ibrahim Traoré's name had become too loud. His calls for African unity were no longer poetic, they were contagious. Somali listened, Guinea nodded, youth across Lagos, Kano, and Enugu reposted his speeches with fire emojis and the word truth. General Alake broke the silence. He's a boy playing soldier. General Naku replied, eyes flat, he's a match in dry season. If we let it burn, it spreads here. General Hassan added, the French can't contain him. ECOWAS is fractured. If Burkina keeps pulling strings, we unravel. So they agreed not on action but on intimidation. A letter would be sent not from them but through an old contact, a retired colonel who once trained Traoré in military strategy, now serving as an attaché. The letter would say nothing openly threatening, just polite reminders of regional security, internal stability, and the need to preserve order. But between the lines, the warning would scream. Before leaving, one general muttered what they all believed but feared to say aloud, if he speaks again, this whole house shakes. What daring move will Traoré make next? Stay with Courageous Voices. Across the border, under red Sahel skies, a young president was already waiting, and when the envelope reached Ouagadougou 3 days later, sealed with diplomacy, but soaked in threat, Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He lit a lamp, poured tea, and whispered to no one. So, they finally said what they meant. The letter arrived in Ouagadougou under the cover of routine, a diplomatic pouch, no escort, no fuss. By the time it reached President Ibrahim Traoré's hands, dusk had already surrendered. Tonight, he didn't call for aides, he didn't sit behind a desk. Instead, he lit an old oil lamp, sat on the floor beside a clay teacup, and opened the envelope like a man peeling back a wound. The paper smelled of cologne and stale power. The signature was familiar, Colonel Musa, his old instructor, turned emissary, but the words were colder than memory allowed. Regional stability is paramount. It began, West Africa needs order, or we will establish it. The lines were polished, bureaucratic, but every syllable pulsed with warning. It wasn't a conversation, it was a command dressed in velvet. Traoré read it twice, then once more aloud as his cabinet trickled in. By the end of the reading, no one breathed. Minister Zara's voice cracked first. This is a threat from a brother. General Kalabali clenched his fists. They want to isolate us first diplomatically, then militarily. Someone else asked, should we call ECOWAS the AU go public? But Traoré didn't answer immediately. He stared into the lamp's flame, letting the heat draw sweat to his temple. Then, calmly, like a man not cornered, but choosing the fight, he said, no, we respond, not with fear, with truth. There was no applause, just a stillness that felt like the air before a storm. Outside, the night deepened. In the distance, a child's drum echoed in a village square. The president folded the letter, slid it beneath the teacup, and whispered to himself, if they want silence, we will give them thunder. The ECOWAS Youth Integration Conference in Accra had the usual script: diplomats in crisp suits, delegates reciting slogans about cooperation, banners with hopeful slogans fluttering in air-conditioned halls. No one expected anything different until Ibrahim Traoré stood up. He wasn't on the speaking list, he hadn't submitted remarks, but as the panel on Pan-African economic synergy began to wrap Traoré calmly approached the podium, the moderators froze, the cameras hesitated, but protocol gave way to presence. He said nothing for 10 seconds, then, in a voice that cut cleaner than any microphone could polish, he spoke. Some of our brothers are becoming what once enslaved us, gasps, not from the press, many had left already, but from the students, the youth delegates seated in the back rows, those who had come not for policy, but for purpose. The words pierced the room. Traoré didn't wait for permission. I received a letter. He continued, not from France, from Nigeria. Silence. His eyes didn't leave the audience. It wasn't signed by ECOWAS, it wasn't a proposal for peace, it was a warning, no, a reminder that when a voice becomes too loud, even your brothers may try to smother it. The front row diplomats shifted in their seats, Nigerian delegates went stiff, phones lifted quietly into the air, recording, uploading, whispering through glass screens to the continent beyond. Traoré reached into his pocket and unfolded the letter. The paper crackled like dry leaves in a forest ready to burn. He didn't read it yet, he only held it up and said, "They told me West Africa needs order or they'll establish it, so I ask you, whose order?" And suddenly it wasn't a conference anymore, it was a reckoning waiting to be televised. What shocking truth will emerge next? Keep watching Courageous Voices. I was trained by Nigerian officers, Traoré began, his voice steady, eyes scanning the hall, and I admired them until now. He held the letter higher, unfolded fully now, its crisp lines visible even from the back rows. This was sent not in the name of peace but in the language of fear. I will read it to you not to shame them but to show you what passes for diplomacy in the shadows. Then without dramatics, he read aloud. West Africa cannot afford disorder. Should Burkina Faso's actions continue to inspire unrest, intervention may become necessary. Regional security must be preserved one way or another. The words landed like dropped stones. No one clapped, no one interrupted, even the cameraman leaned forward. He lowered the letter, folded it gently, and placed it on the podium like it was a loaded weapon. Then he raised his eyes, calm, unflinching, burning. You speak of order, he said slowly, but what you mean is obedience. A ripple stirred through the delegates. You speak of unity, he continued, but what you build it with is chains. Several ECOWAS officials exchanged looks. One Nigerian delegate whispered something under his breath and exited the hall. Traoré leaned closer to the mic, but didn't raise his voice. I don't fear French puppets, but I grieve when I see African hands pulling the same strings. The whisper spread. A youth delegate from Togo wiped a tear. A student from Côte d'Ivoire started live streaming. The room was no longer neutral, it had taken a side, even if no one said so, and at that moment, somewhere behind polished doors and neutral policy memos, the mask of West African brotherhood began to crack. Traoré didn't pause, he let the truth build like a rising tide. Ghana once had the world's richest gold veins, he said. Today, her children dig with bare hands while companies from Zurich and London fly the bars out by night. He turned his gaze westward. Niger holds the uranium that lights French homes, but her villages sit in darkness, her rivers glow, poisoned, and they call it development. Then slowly he looked toward the Nigerian delegation, and Nigeria, oh Nigeria, the giant who dines in Paris, while her people swim through flood water just to reach school. Oil flows like blood beneath her soil, but only the elite drink the profit. The rest, they drown. He stepped back from the microphone, voice lower but deeper than before. Africa is bleeding, he said, but not only from the wounds they gave us, from the knives we hand to each other, from the silence we keep when it is our brother holding the blade. You could feel the shame settle like dust in a tomb. Not fear, shame, the kind that makes a man remember the price of looking away. No one moved. Then quietly a girl from Cape Verde stood, then another from the Gambia, a wave of youth rising in slow defiance of the hush. Someone clapped once, then again, then the room erupted. Applause thundered like rain on a tin roof, not polite, not diplomatic, raw, free, and beneath it all, the older leaders sat still, pale and quiet, like monuments to a world that had just been pierced. Traoré didn't smile, he didn't bow, he simply stepped back from the podium, as if to say, the truth doesn't need volume, it needs witnesses. The room had not yet finished clapping when Traoré stepped forward one last time, no notes, no gestures, just a stillness in his body that made the silence return. He spoke slowly now, each word placed like a stone. If your generals are afraid of my voice, he said, then they must fear your ears. The audience stilled, because I do not speak for myself, I speak for those they've forgotten. Gasps rippled, sharp, quiet, involuntary, and then, like sparks to dry grass, the phones rose, screens lit up. TikTok started, lives went live, no one waited for the media, they were the media now. Within minutes, the quote had gone viral across student networks in Senegal, Liberia, and Cameroon. That night, a mural appeared in Bamako, a painted ear wrapped in gold chains, cracked open by a mouth speaking fire. The caption read, "He speaks for us." By dawn, Lagos woke to something different. On a crowded intersection in Surulere, a giant billboard for a telecommunications company had been defaced, spray paint and blood red carved across the smiling model's face. 4 words, "He spoke for us." In Abuja, Nigerian security agents scrambled to contain what they could, but hashtags had already taken root. Forgotten Voices for Africa listens. Traoré spoke. In Kano, a group of teenagers printed his speech and posted copies on the doors of closed schools. In Port Harcourt, a fishermen's union pledged to play the speech on loudspeakers at dawn, and in a WhatsApp group of retired military officers, one Nigerian general wrote without punctuation, "We should have kept silent, now the boy is a storm." But Traoré didn't know all that yet. He was already on a dirt road outside Accra, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic, quiet, waiting, knowing the real thunder was just beginning. What powerful alliance will emerge next? Stay with Courageous Voices. 3 days after the speech, Ibrahim Traoré was back in Ouagadougou when a secure line lit up in the early morning. The voice on the other end was warm, gravelled, and unmistakably North African. "You are not alone, Captain," said the president of Algeria. "There are others watching," quietly, but watching. There was no small talk, no request. Just a shared understanding between two men who knew what it meant to stand alone and what it cost to remain upright. No press release followed, no treaty was signed. But 5 days later, an unmarked Algerian cargo plane touched down at Ouagadougou International Airport just after midnight. Its manifest claimed humanitarian aid. The crate said otherwise. Inside were technicians, engineers, satellite dishes, portable transmission towers, and hard drives filled with open-source media tools. No branding, no foreign logos. Just one message scrolled inside the lid of the largest crate: "Let Africa hear itself." The equipment was unloaded before sunrise, quietly dispersed to safe locations around the city. There were no reporters, just whispers among volunteers who carried cables and crates with silent urgency. In an abandoned radio station near Zagona, the lights flickered on for the first time in years. Dust gave way to purpose. Young journalists, many of them university dropouts after foreign-funded media houses collapsed, stepped back into booths and studios. Their eyes were different now, focused, awake. Traoré visited briefly that evening, unannounced, he said. Nothing grand, just stood at the center of the studio floor and nodded. "Tell our stories," he said, barely above a whisper, "and tell them like they matter." By dawn, the first broadcast echoed through villages untouched by Wi-Fi, but forever shaped by rumor. A new voice was rising in Africa, not colonized, not filtered, just free. The next day, France moved fast. The speech had rattled more than Abuja. It had trembled old European corridors where empire had simply changed clothes. Paris didn't send diplomats or soldiers this time, they sent stories, within days. Facebook pages disguised as Pan-African news sites began circulating headlines: "Traoré trains child soldiers in the north." "Burkina rejects ECOWAS food." The ECOWAS emergency summit in Abuja was supposed to be swift and disciplined. Nigeria had lobbied hard behind closed doors, calling for immediate sanctions against Burkina Faso, the official charge destabilizing regional unity. But everyone in the room knew what it was really about: control, pride, fear, and one barefoot president who refused to be managed. The hall was draped in flags and stiff with formality, but something in the air had shifted as Nigeria's delegate presented the sanctions proposal. Murmurs stirred among the West African representatives. Senegal's ambassador leaned back, arms crossed, when called to comment. He simply said, "We abstained." Silence followed. Then came Guinea. Their delegate stood, not to argue, but to quietly remove his earpiece, push back his chair, and walk out. No words, just a chair left empty like a warning. Whispers grew, eyes darted. Then Ghana's delegate, a soft-spoken woman in a blue gele, stood up. She looked briefly at the Nigerian generals seated along the wall, then pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her voice was calm, but it shook the room. He said, she read, "If your generals are afraid of my voice, they must fear your ears because I speak for those they've forgotten." She paused, then continued, "You fear our ears, but we hear each other now." The words hung heavy. The Nigerian chair demanded a vote, but the motion faltered. Mali and Guinea refused. Côte d'Ivoire hesitated. Even Sierra Leone asked for more time. The result? No consensus. For the first time in ECOWAS history, the bloc fractured, not over borders, but over who the people were listening to. And outside the summit, protesters chanted, not against a country, but for one man's words. The old order had met a new voice, and it blinked first. The next day, a bell had just rung in a cramped Lagos classroom when the boy noticed it. Words scrolled in charcoal across the old chalkboard, rough but clear. "If your generals are afraid of my voice, they must fear your ears." The teacher frowned, walked in, and without a word wiped it clean with a rag that smelled of dust and discipline. The board returned to equations. The moment disappeared, but not for the boy. His name was Damolaire. 13. Too quiet for debate club, too restless for silence. As the teacher spoke of fractions, he pulled out his worn notebook and rewrote the words in the back, pressing hard so the letters left a groove. That night, under the soft hum of a generator and the bark of dogs in the distance, he opened TikTok and turned on his cracked phone camera. "I'm 13, he said. "I'm Nigerian," and I believe him. No music, no filter, just his face, wide-eyed and tired with the sentence behind him rewritten on his wall in pencil. "He speaks for us." By morning, the video had 2 million views. By noon, it was stitched, shared, translated, remixed. Dancers in Nairobi performed to the rhythm of his whisper. Activists in Dar quoted him. In Accra, school children wrote his name in chalk below Traoré's, and in Abuja, a military aide handed a tablet to one of the same generals who wrote the letter. The man watched the video in silence. No words, just that boy's eyes. "Should we remove it?" the aide asked. The general didn't answer because the truth had already escaped. Not in war, not in rebellion, but in a whisper, a child's echo that found a continent ready to roar. If this story moved you, don't just scroll, make your voice count. Like the video to show your support for real African voices. Comment below, do you believe Traoré is the voice Africa needs right now? Subscribe for more powerful stories they don't want you to hear on Courageous Voices, and share this with someone who still believes the truth can't go viral. This isn't just a video, it's a movement. Be part of it.